Although modern humans, Homo sapiens, emerged hundreds of thousands of years ago, much of their history remains a mystery. Writing, which appeared during the Bronze Age alongside the first civilizations, rarely offers comprehensive details about medieval societies, eras that, historically speaking, were practically yesterday, let alone the even earlier periods. Archaeology, which focuses on material culture, sadly, has its limitations. Organic items like wood, leather, and plant fibers can survive for thousands of years under the right soil conditions, such as balanced acidity and moisture. But even that doesn't help much when studying the Stone Age, the Paleolithic, where most of what survives are stones and bones, with the latter being far less common. Still, microscopic analysis of stone tools, traceology, confirms that early humans worked extensively with organic materials like wood, leather, antler, and bone. At the same time, studying tool shapes and conducting typological analyses suggests a wide array of implements: scrapers, awls, drills, and even saws. Spears and javelins were also staples of hunting gear. Interestingly, arrowheads made of flint or obsidian were placed into grooves on shafts and secured with leather straps, using a mix of bitumen and sand as adhesive. Experiments show that removing such an arrowhead can take a force of about 70 kilograms. Not a small effort. Bitumen wasn't available everywhere though, so other adhesives likely existed. The Aztecs, for example, after countless trials, developed glue made from clay, turtle dung, and bat blood. Surprisingly, this mixture hardened into something remarkably stone-like. Neanderthals, who lived in Europe long before our ancestors arrived, had already figured out how to make birch tar, possibly for adhesives. In France, at the Arcy-sur-Cure archaeological site, researchers found twisted plant fibers preserved on a Neanderthal tool. This suggests they could make ropes, which opens up possibilities for producing nets, incredibly useful for hunting and fishing. Over the past 50 years, perceptions of the Stone Age have changed significantly. Ancient humans no longer appear as perpetually starving, ragged scavengers, spending every waking hour searching for food. In fact, anthropologists concluded long ago, based on ethnographic data, that a few hours of work per day were often enough to meet their basic needs. While there are occasional traces of cannibalism, possibly ritualistic in some cultures, Dr. Leonid Vishняtsky's work suggests that for most of the Paleolithic, there's little clear evidence of armed conflict. Such evidence usually appears toward the end of the era. Organized large-scale conflicts, on the other hand, only seem to emerge during the agricultural age. Modern hunter-gatherer tribes also tend to exhibit lower levels of aggression compared to early agricultural societies, which introduced concepts like private property. For true organized warfare, beyond the occasional skirmish, you need both private property and a system of governance, a state. Yet even modern bushmen manage just fine with spears, bows, and various poisons, suggesting that the hunting tools of ancient humans may have been far more diverse than we imagine. According to the Anthropogenesis website, even chimpanzees use around 500 tools, sticks of different lengths, bark scoops, and hard fruits. This hints that by the late Paleolithic and Mesolithic periods, some human groups likely had far more varied arsenals than we currently know. Unfortunately, many tools made from organic materials or unworked stones didn't survive. This is where ethnographic parallels come in handy. For instance, the indigenous Maori of New Zealand used what we'd call a flail, a large unworked stone tied to a rope. Known as the mere, it was likely used for hunting large birds like the moa. Naturally, leather straps or plant fiber ropes don't survive over time, and unworked stones rarely attract archaeologists' attention. Still, such weapons likely existed in ancient times, especially since similar tools were used by Native American tribes like the Shoshone, who called it the pagamagon. But if you take 3 such stones, tie their ropes together at one end, you get an even more versatile weapon, the bola, a term from Spanish. The cords were usually around 40 centimeters long, with each stone weighing up to 200 grams. This weapon could be swung like a flail for close combat or thrown, reportedly reaching distances of over 100 paces. The bola wasn't just a weapon that delivered a blow, it entangled the victim's limbs, reportedly even causing animals as large as horses to fall. Depending on its size, bolas were used for hunting anything from large game to small birds. Speaking of hunting efficiency, the short time spent by hunter-gatherers to secure food was largely due to human omnivorousness. Take the Bushmen, for instance. When they couldn't catch big game, and yes, elephants were on their list, they'd go for small rodents or birds. If the hunt went poorly, they could even eat locusts or other insects. In Upper Paleolithic Europe, hunting was more specialized, thanks to an abundance of resources. This is evident from the piles of specific animal bones found at prehistoric sites. For example, in the Kostenki area near Voronezh, hunters specialized in mammoths. South of there, in the Donbass region near Rogalik village, wild horses were the main prey, while at Amvrosivka, near Donetsk, bison hunting dominated. Each type of hunt likely had its own techniques, requiring tools beyond just a spear. Returning to the bola, it's worth noting that even simple designs, 3 or 4 unshaped stones tied with strings, were used by indigenous Brazilians, as well as by the Eskimos, Koryaks, and Chukchi. This versatile weapon could easily have existed during early human migrations. Another essential category of hunting and combat tools was made of wood. And let's be honest, our ancestors weren't dumb enough to rely on a plain stick with a knot. They had at least a few clever approaches. One such approach came from Australia. Long, slightly curved, lens-shaped boomerangs. These were like wooden swords made from hard wood, capable of both striking and being thrown. Meanwhile, Native Americans had some ingenious designs, like clubs with rounded ends, sometimes fitted with bone, horn, or later metal spikes, turning them into brutal weapons. The small strike area concentrated the force, creating deep but narrow wounds. Some clubs had flat sides with sharp flint or obsidian blades inserted into grooves. Some looked like stocks with spikes, similar to gunstock clubs. There were countless variations. Obsidian, while hard and brittle, wasn't kind to unprotected human bodies. Let's face it, unless you're covered in solid metal plates, it's going to hurt. This concept of combining wood and stone culminated in the legendary Aztec macuahuitl, a flat wooden club with sharp stone blades embedded along its edges. These could form a continuous blade or act like jagged teeth. As I've mentioned before, obsidian doesn't need sharpening. It's essentially glass with flakes sharper than a scalpel. Despite weighing about 3 kilograms, similar to a medieval two-handed sword, the macuahuitl couldn't properly chop but delivered deep slashes. Humans began using such microlith-based tools during the Mesolithic era. Analyses show they were used for tasks like cutting wild grains and later for arrows and darts. I found no evidence of macuahuitl-like weapons in the Mesolithic, but the technology was there to make them. We also know that ancient humans didn't just throw spears, they used spear throwers made of wood, horn, or bone. Some surviving examples prove this, but slings, made entirely of perishable materials, leave no physical evidence. However, the fact that slings were known in ancient Egypt and Greece as well as the Americas suggests this weapon is extremely ancient. It's also worth noting that where humans discovered potent natural poisons, blowpipes, or blowguns were actively used. Ethnographic data show that these were widespread across Africa, Asia, and South America. These tubes, ranging from half a meter to several meters long, could shoot darts up to 30 steps away. Some tribes reportedly even created wooden pistons, turning their blowguns into basic air pumps capable of firing darts up to 100 meters. However, most organic poisons either degrade quickly or lose potency when cooked, making their concentration in food negligible. The availability of ropes, leather straps, glue, and effective tools for working wood, horn, and bone gave ancient humans endless possibilities for crafting weapons. This technological foundation could even support constructing torsion machines like Roman ballistae. That said, such an arsenal wasn't always necessary. In the Paleolithic era, internal conflicts were rare, and humans hadn't yet invented one of the simplest and most effective military tools, the shield. By the Mesolithic, however, population density increased and evidence of armed conflict became more common. This likely wasn't a fight over resources, but rather the result of expanded social interactions. As neighbors moved closer, finding reasons for a brawl wasn't too hard. Let's not idealize early humans. Even without private property, they shared the same selfish instincts as any animal. For example, a spear might have been someone's personal belonging, but since it was often made on the fly, it wasn't particularly valuable. However, with the advent of agriculture, surplus production, and metals as a universal equivalent, humans began waging large-scale, ruthless wars. Anarcho-primitivists argue that humanity took a wrong turn, distancing itself from nature. I don't count myself among them, though I did read John Zerzan's work back when I was a research fellow. But it's worth noting that just as every authority justifies itself by criticizing its predecessors, every era does the same. When defining the present, we focus on modern achievements while conveniently ignoring the negatives. On the flip side, the past is usually painted in darker tones. For instance, we're more likely to hear about how advanced modern dentistry is than the fact that today's food has drastically increased the number of people with dental problems. I came across data showing that in Bronze Age Sweden, cavities were found in about 8% of the population. In the Middle Ages, it rose to nearly 20%, and by modern times, it reached nearly 90%. Or take something like ergonomic office chairs. They may seem great for your back at first glance, but the percentage of people with spinal issues has skyrocketed in wealthier countries. Modern fruits and vegetables contain fewer vitamins and minerals than they did in the mid-20th century, and these examples, just snowflakes on the tip of the iceberg. Technological progress can certainly be seen as a benefit for our species, but the cheapest, most basic propaganda always focuses on spreading optimism, while genuine progress often requires constructive criticism, something very few people enjoy. Anarcho-primitivism, for all its romanticizing of the distant past, does provide a valuable critique of the present. And notably, its advocates don't call for taking power to fix everything, because they stand in total opposition to civilization itself. Personally, I hope the world undergoes radical changes. I'd like to think that future generations will look back on our era as a dark age, without it being propaganda to glorify their own time. I'd love to believe humanity will rise to every challenge and finally go beyond the limits of our planet. Because if this doesn't happen, and civilization somehow eliminates itself along with all life, it would confirm the anarcho-primitivists were right, and history will write us off as the species that traded mammoths for Netflix and Lost.